right, so today we are going to be talking about mirroring and story structure. And so, of course, we spent the last couple of sessions talking about all of our different turning points in the story structure design. And we've talked a lot about how there are all these parallels side to side. And today I just really wanted to take you through step by step all of the mirrors, all of the parallels that I think exist in stories, and how we can use them to really show a very dynamic story, how we can show this character that is experiencing this belief shift, that is going through step by step, changing from that surviving person in the beginning to the thriving person in the end. So the way that I really visualize the story structure diagram is we just break it in half right at the midpoint and we fold it up on itself. And as things meet, we can see that they're really excellent parallels. They mirror each other perfectly, with again that midpoint being the reflective axis where where we do see a shift. We see things, we're going to see things differently on each side of the mirror, and the way that we use the parallels, so the things that are the same contrasted with the things that are different, really gives us powerful movement in a story, particularly the second half of the story. All right, so two turning points that we really haven't talked about before, just quickly, is the hook and the resolution, essentially your opening scene and your ending scene. And this is very, I think, very classically what people mean, or what people really talk about when they talk about the parallels or they talk about mirroring. It's sort of this idea that, we're going to show them in their surviving world, we're going to show them in their everyday life, they're going to go through their adventure, and we're going to see them come out the other side in thriving mode. And if we think about, like Homer's Odyssey, very like old school hero's journey, we actually will see them start in one place, they leave, and we see the parallel as they come back to the same place where they have changed. And while they're physically in the same location, while they're physically, doing, or physically in the same situation, the situation is not the same. Things have changed for them. And particularly I think about, again, that opening scene, that surviving, we show them in an everyday crisis that they're having to navigate. And we show them when everything is resolved, when everything is sorted out, and we see them sort of living in the fruits of their adventure, living in that kind of perfect happily ever after world. And of course, we're talking about a whole, like a story as a whole. So if you've got things that if you've got a series that's being broken up into different novels, of course, things are not going to be perfect in that resolution, but things are probably going to be a step up. Things are going to have changed a little bit from the beginning, from the hook. So we see that perfect mirror parallel. And so again, I think that that's really, when we hear about it in the way that lots of other people talk about fiction, that is the big sort of mirror that we hold up at the end of the story to say, look how things have changed. So those are two points that we bring up. And again, all of this mirroring all centers around the midpoint. And so if we think about it, the midpoint is really the moment when the true nature of the conflict is revealed, right? This is when they see, we see how bad things are, but we see that spark of hope. We see that demonstration of their values, the demonstration of the thing that is actually going to allow them to succeed and overcome the main story problem. So this all happens right at the midpoint, and that is perfect because that shifts everything for the second half. And when we're talking about the midpoint, of course, the midpoint is right in the middle of Act 2. And Act two as a whole is characterized by taking action. But we see this mirror effect coming in where Act 2A, or the first half of it, is all about them following their false belief, following the false values that they think that they need to embrace in order to succeed. Essentially, the things that they've been taught, the things that allow them to survive. They're taking action from these things. They've got their they've set the false goal. They have this plan in place. And the first half of Act Two is really about them following that plan, which again is based on the false belief. Act 2B, the second half, after they've been through that midpoint, spark of hope, true nature of the conflict being revealed, they're still taking action, but they're starting to bring in the true values. So now, instead of acting from the false belief, they are starting to experiment. They haven't made a full shift yet, but they're really starting to experiment with the true values, or the belief that's going to allow them to actually succeed in the end. So we see the contrast there. We see the contrast in their actions. And looking really specifically at the turning points that are there, of course, in the first half of Act Two, we'll remember we had the turning point to self-determination. And in the second half of Act Two, just opposite it, we have the unexpected failure. And both of these are characterized by the hero questioning themselves. They're also being introduced to the consequences of failure, right? So the self-determination is very often they're going to meet someone, something is going to show them how they could be if they fail to make the shift. So often they're meeting someone who's a foil, someone who's an example of what they don't want to be, and that might sometimes it's someone they meet externally. Sometimes it's just a reflection of themselves. They're starting to realize something there. The unexpected failure is actually remarkably similar, because the unexpected failure is where they typically revolves around death, or the big consequences of not making the shift. So we're seeing sort of an up level in the consequences, and again, the unexpected failure usually is um, action adventure. It's a reminder that death is a real possibility in this adventure. In something softer like a romance novel, it's more of like a personal death, an internal death, a death of the potential for love, whatever it is. But they're reminded again of the consequences of failure in both of these moments. And I think that the parallel happens, or the what we're showcasing here is we're showcasing how much more involved the character is, how much more they care about the consequences of failure. They care about both, absolutely, but we're just upping the ante a little bit. Alrighty, Roma, I see your question. I'm going to get to it at the end. Okay, so next we get into going kind of out from there, out from the midpoint. We've got the key event, and we've got the all is lost moment. So these are our major turning points in addition to that midpoint. And at both of them, this is where we're revealing something about the adventure. And in the key event, we're revealing, this is what I call the not in Kansas anymore moment. But this is where they're stepping into the adventure world, and it is not what they expected. So they show up, they've got their plan, they're showing up, they're acting in the way that they think they're supposed to act, and things go wrong. That is the reality of the adventure. That is the reality of the world around them. The all is lost moment, very similar in that we're getting another dose of reality, but this time it's more around the goal and it's more around the person or the hero. So they have been going through their adventure. They've been doing a lot, and the all is lost moment is where they either um, with the false goal, they either fully succeed or fully fail. They hit a can't turn back kind of moment. Who am I kidding? They're all can't turn back kind of moments, but they I love a good all is lost moment where they actually succeed at the goal that they set in the beginning, and they realize that that goal is not going to make them happy. They realize that they actually cannot tolerate that goal. They can't, it's not bringing them what they really wanted, which was to feel good again, to feel safe again, to feel whatever it is that they started with. They recognize that all is lost. We've also got the alternative to that, to the success all is lost, where they fail. They fail spectacularly. They have no hope of resurrecting the goal that they set in the beginning. It is totally gone, and they have to regroup and find something else. In both of these major turning points, I really think that the parallel is or the thing that we're highlighting here is how they're looking outside of themselves and saying, my actions are not having the response on others that I wanted, and how they're looking inside of themselves, the way that they're looking at it and saying, my actions are not having the response that I wanted on me. And again, both remarkably similar moments, perhaps not in, it's not like the hook and the resolution where we're seeing them in a very, in a physical situation that's very similar in the mirror, but we're seeing the way that their thoughts have changed. Do you, I hope that that's really clear. I hope that it's clear to see how in the beginning they're acting, but they're not really thinking about themselves and how they're showing up for them. They're more looking at the external world to give them feedback. And as we hit the all is lost, they're really going internally for that feedback. They're going internally to figure out if this is working or not. All right, and we'll continue our journey outward from the midpoint. So we've got Act 1 and we've got Act 3 as nice little mirrors for each other as well. Now, on the outside, they probably don't look like they have that much in common, and that's good. Act 1 and Act 3, they're much more external acts compared to Act 2, meaning that the story is becoming more about the external tension rather than the internal tension, right? That middle build is all about the internal tension that leads to the belief shift. Act 1 and 3 is where we're seeing what that belief shift looks like on the outside. But in Act 1, this is really where the hero accepts the adventure. They set that false goal. They come up with the plan. And really, we're seeing what they believe in the beginning, what the values are that they hold. And really, really, we're seeing the things that they believe they should do in order to succeed. In Act 3, this is where they're going to actually refuse the false goal. Right? So complete, we're seeing that mirror effect where things are completely opposite. We're seeing them refuse the false goal, and then they're going to set another one. I think Act 3 is actually like a whole mini story where they have, the all is lost is like an inciting incident for them. They have to come up with a new goal, they have to come up with a new plan, and they have to execute the plan. And that plan in the climax is going to have a little bit of rockiness to it, where they're going to have to regroup and come again. So Act 3 is where they refuse that false goal and they set a new goal, same as they're setting a goal in Act 1. This is also where they're going to finish the adventure, right? So act 1, they've accepted, they've accepted an adventure. They didn't really want it, but it turned out to be the least bad choice. So they go on and accept it. Act 3, very similarly, we'll talk in a second about the refusal moment, but the refusal moment is where they have to make a new least bad choice based off of their new beliefs and the new values that they have accepted and that they are now living off of. Um, and so now they kind of take on a new adventure. Again, they go through that entire sort of mini story through act 3, and they come out the other side and they've actually managed to finish the adventure. And we also see where their hopes and aspirations have changed dramatically. Act 1 is all about surviving. Act 3 is all about thriving. Sorry, I was about to say surviving again. But act 3 is all about thriving. It's all about getting them to that next level, and it's all about the things that they are willing to accept. They've been through this whole belief shift through the middle builds. And in act 1, they could accept surviving. In act 3, they can't accept surviving anymore because they've changed so significantly. Act 3, they can only accept next level. All right, so again, really great parallel between the inciting incident and the refusal, which are sort of core moments in Act 1 and Act 3. So, that inciting incident, they take on the false goal, they make an impossible choice. There's something they don't want to do, there's something that's really scary, something that they say, I'm never, ever, ever going to do that, until they're presented with something else that would be much worse, something truly terrible. And we see their values play against each other in the inciting incident as they have to make this choice of what they're going to do. And again, they take on the false goal, which sets up the whole rest of the story. The refusal happens in Act 3. It is almost the exact same thing. It's the exact same thing that happens. They're going to take on a new goal. They're going to reject the old goal and take on the new one. If we think in the inciting instant, they had a goal to avoid this adventure, and then they have to take on the adventure, so they change their goal in that way. In the refusal, they've had this goal that they've carried with them the whole time, and they have to switch it out. They have to let it go and take on a new goal. And it's another impossible choice. Typically, we call it like a cannot go on moment. They can no longer be okay with the original goal, the same as the inciting incident. And it's a fantastic parallel because it shows how the main character has further embraced their own values, right? The values of the character, the things that are important to them don't shift, but how much they're willing to accept those values, how much they're willing to um, work with those values versus what it is that they think they should do. That is what changes. That's what changes in a story. And we see that at the refusal moment, where suddenly they are making a huge, impossible choice based off of these values. So fantastic parallel to show the growth of the character. Right? And I really think that the whole um, beauty of mirroring is how we show the growth of the character, how we show these steps, step by step, where we take them. I think of it as well as taking them sort of from like a high point where everything is okay. Hold on, where they think everything is good, life is good, and we really like dip them down into a lot of stress, into a lot of difficulty, a lot of internal tension, and then we start to bring them back out the other side. And so in the first half, again, the first half is all about that false belief, the false values. They're living that surviving life. They have limited actions. That doesn't mean that they can't do a lot of things, but it means that the actions they're taking continue to limit them, and they're based off of what they think they should do. Maybe they've been taught this, maybe this is a belief in the culture, maybe this is just the things that they've learned that help them get by, but is not everything that they're capable of, so they're limited. Again, false belief, false values. And then we start breaking those down. We start breaking those down and we see how in the setup, in the build up, we're still false belief, false values, but we start to get down into Act Two and we start to see how through the key event, things are not working the way that they think they should. They're starting to question, they're starting to try things. They move into self determination, which is where they really start to question and open up to the possibility that there's something different. Lots of internal tension when you're facing the possibility of doing something different. And that continues. They're seeing how things continue not to work. And they hit the midpoint. That midpoint is a super low, right? And that might be situationally a super low, or it's just a super low for the false belief. And they have that spark of hope where they see that things could be different. And they go into the second half, and the second half is all about the successful belief. It's all about the true values. It's all about your main character embracing the thing that makes them a hero. And they're starting to take those heroic actions, which is all about what is right. And when I say what is right, it's sort of two levels. Partly it's the theme, it's the thing that you're trying to share with this story, but it's also the things that your character feels in their heart of hearts is really the right thing. So we've got them down in the dumps with the midpoint, and we start to bring them back out. And the second half of Act Two is where they're starting to experiment still, but they're starting to experiment with the successful belief. They're starting to experiment with the true values. This is where we see them with a lot of that, like a lot of cognitive dissonance, where they're doing they're following one plan, but they're also following another thing, and they're trying them both at the same time. Very high tension if it's written well, very high tension, very exciting. And we're really starting to pull them back up until we get into the all is lost moment. We get into the refusal, where lots and lots of tension. We go through that whole climax section, and we drop them back in a new status quo, something that is even higher than it was before. My hands are all backwards, but that's that's the whole concept of mirroring. That's how I really see it. And again, it is about providing the step-by-step growth for the character. It's about taking the reader on that journey. It's about showing the reader how things have changed. Because the last thing we want to do too is we don't want to do a character belief shift halfway and show them as the same character up until the end when they suddenly just start making different decisions, because that's going to feel really jarring. That's going to really not land very well. So we need these step-by-step pieces. And I love the idea of mirroring for really showing the reader how they're changing rather than just the actions. We're really highlighting how the beliefs have changed, how the outlook has changed, and really just how that character is thinking differently and starting to believe differently.